Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome back to the Blacktown Premier League Podcast. My name is 𝐏𝐃𝐃𝐂𝐓, and this is the first ever time we try a new annual series. It's called the Predictions Podcast. Are you excited? Well, you should be. A little nervous? Probably. Me too. I'll explain everything after I cue this intro music.
Here come workers on!
But it's falling here towards Icon!
Oh my word.
To find her teammate in Izzy Grant! And now played and struck and in! People, Ryan Dominisi! Further forward now, Tagira!
We're all ready to play, and yeah, we'll go out and smoke it this time.
If you remember last year's midway point podcast, which is where we sort of talked about how every team had performed so far across WPL, PL2 and of course Men's Premier League 1, we then followed that up with an end of season review, sort of using those but also the expectations we had upon those teams. The issue that I found is that the expectations weren't quite black and white, and that is exactly what this is designed to do. Give my predictions on what I expect from teams in black and white. Every single team in the Blacktown Premier League system is about to be talked about at length. We're going to be talking about new players, existing players, how the two might assimilate, a new coaching approach, a new staff member here or there. There are plenty of grey areas and plenty of uncertainties. But what I do know is at the end of the day, these are just one person's predictions. Every single team is going to be placed in one of four categories. We'll begin from the bottom. The category teams want to avoid is the Jeopardy category. That category is for teams that I think are going to be towards the bottom of the table, and for PL1, which is the last league that we will review, obviously has the most Jeopardy behind it because you can actually get relegated from that division. The category above Jeopardy is mid-table. It means I think you'll be a couple of points clear from those at the bottom, but I don't think you're going to challenge for those teams at the top. The next category up is top four potential. This means that I don't think that you're going to quite compete for the title, but you certainly should finish in the top four. Now, there are going to be some teams that I will label as top four potential and then not actually predict to finish in the top four. That's okay. That's what I'm here to do. Be a bit controversial here and there. And at the top, which I'm going to cap to 2 teams per league, is called Premiership Contenders. Premiership Contenders is pretty self-explanatory. Right, I actually do not want to delay anymore. Let's get right into this. We're going to begin with the WPL. Once again, with Parkley, it's more of the same when it comes to the playing staff, but the biggest change is that Luke Ryan and, of course, his partner now, Courtney Ryan, has stepped away from the team. Parkley have had a knack of keeping their core squad together, and they have done this for about the last decade or so. So in some ways, you can predict exactly where Parkley is going to finish. What it depends on is the quality of the teams around them. Will teams get better around them or worse? And my prediction, based upon who I've seen come in at the other Hills and Granville-based teams, is that other teams are certainly going to get better this year. I'm labelling Parkley as top four potential, and here is why. Parkley scored 30 goals from 18 games last year. They've also lost Shannon Murray to Ponds in the off-season. That's 1.6 goals per game as a team that finished in the finals. That's 10 less than Holroyd, 23 less than their Blacktown rivals Quakers Juniors, and a scarcely believable 46 behind eventual premiers and champions Kellyville Colts. Parkley's always been built on defence. It's what they've been known for. Of course, Brittany Rogers, I think, is the best defender in the entire competition. But unless that attack improves under this new direction of coaching, I think as the other teams improve around them, they might stagnate or even decline a little bit. Regress, perhaps, is the right word. Top four potential, certainly, but I don't think they're premiership favourites at all. I'm going to now touch on one of the brand new WPL teams, of which there are 2. We'll do them back to back. We'll start with Ponds. Of course, we just mentioned that they picked up Shannon Murray from Parkley. She's going to add, let's say, 10 goals if she leads the line herself. But to those of you who have a good memory and stick in touch with the WPL competition, you'll understand, or at least you'll come to understand, that this Ponds team is predominantly made up of Winston Hills Bears from last year. And unfortunately, Winston Hills Bears from last year were not a top 4 competing club. Julia Topalovic has also joined up, another premiership winner and All-Star representative from Parkley, of course, formerly from Parkley. But they're also joined by Bianca Cameron, Ruth Wigley, and Chantal Lekov as well. These are good, solid players, but not players that finished too high up the table last year. Just to state some facts. As you'll probably come to see as a theme throughout this video, there's a couple of players that I'm not able to tell you all that much about. That's because I don't know them and you don't know them yet either. They're brand new to the competition. But with that kind of player base, that's where they've been building from. I would predict mid-table for Ponds. Similar story with Ropes. They've got a Division 1 team that they've sort of taken players from, an all-age team as well. Some over 30s from a nearby Nepean-based comp as well. So there's good bits of experience and quality coming, and also circles of friends and players that are going to help each group assimilate, and hopefully they can all combine as one big group and build over the next couple of years. Do they have more experience in the WPL than Ponds? No. They're going to finish mid-table, that is my prediction, and they'll probably finish below Ponds as well. Quakers Hill Tigers finished winless last year. They picked up 2 points from 2 draws throughout the season. It's hard to imagine that it could get any worse than that, but I'm going to be straight up. It could, but I don't think it will. Now, they're going to be joined by an influx of 21s players, who of course finished second in their respective 21s league, and also finish as grand final winners here on that Sunday, of course. The question is, if those 21s players who are now joining this squad to back them up and provide that youthful touch, but the question is, if they were good enough last year, why didn't they? If they are so good and ready to take them to the next level, why didn't they just play WPL? And there could have been a decision by the club to hold them back on purpose, to just let them continue growing as a group in 21s, let them have another grand final win before they get slogged by the WPL. If there's a reason for that, then great, then maybe we'll see something extraordinary this year. But I can't see them providing too much of a boost unless they've gone and recruited elsewhere, which, to my knowledge, I'm not aware of. I think it's only fair that based upon the experiences that we've seen Quakers Tigers Women's Premier League go through last year, it's going to be more of the same, unless there's big changes that we don't know about, of course. So I'm going to say that they are, in fact, in that jeopardy spot.
Hello. Strange intervention here, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I'm in Victoria at the moment, finishing off a couple of things that I think need to be added to this podcast. The first thing is a prediction for Marion's Women's Premier League team. Now, based upon the signings that they've made, which include from some NPL2 clubs, including Blacktown City, and the pre-season that they've had, as you can see by what I've written up here in the graphic, they are going to be one of the biggest improvers of the WPL Blacktown-based teams. They've had one of the longest and most arduous pre-seasons with genuine competitive games so far, as if you've been following them on Facebook, and that's really impressive. So should they take that momentum and those experiences as gelling as a new team with a good mix of some of those players that have been there since the all-age ladies days and these new girls that have come in from the NPL sphere, they're going to be competing for the top 4. Do I think they'll make it in? There's certainly a chance, but they are competing with some very good teams, but they are slowly becoming one of those very good teams. So, Marion Women's, top 4 potential.
Quakers Hill Juniors are going to do great things this year. They finished second last year. They scored a boatload of goals. They conceded a very small amount of goals, and they provided so much fun for those who got the chance to watch them on the live stream or at the grounds themselves if you were lucky enough to get there too. Quakers Hill Juniors have added to their team that finished second last year, and they've got rid of some players who weren't quite at the level to start each week, which means that their player base floor has actually raised. Their ceiling might not necessarily have raised, but their player base floor has raised. That means the squad as a whole has gotten better. Premiership candidates, absolutely they are. So here's a little look in full as to how my WPL predictions look, and of course from the top down, Quakers Hill Juniors, as we just mentioned just then, are going to be at the top. I have no doubts about that. Parklea will be finishing ahead of the 2 new teams in Ropes and Ponds. It's the question of if Parklea can finish in the top 4. It depends how those Hills teams and how those Granville teams have recruited, and I do think, of course, that Quakers Tigers are going to be at the bottom for just maybe another season or so while this new batch of talent develops. Premier League 2 is going to be a really difficult comp to predict. Why is that? Because for the first time in my short tenure, there is no clear favourite to go up. Don't get me wrong, I have a favourite that I'm about to share with you, but there's no clear favourite. Prospect and Creek were quite clearly ahead of the curve and had far more experience on the teams around them. Tigers then took that experience that they learnt from that season into the 2023 campaign and got themselves into the first division, losing only 1 game. And last year, Polonia were full of PL1 players, and of course they made their way up. This season, I ask, whom is the standout? Maybe you have one. I don't. Let's start with Glenwood, though, the grand final winners. Are you ready? They're top 4 hopefuls. They've lost 30 goal contributions and a combined 12 winning goals, 8 for Marco and 4 for Ash Alumi. They're gone. They're not here anymore. One's not even on this part of the hemisphere. Yes, I know that Ash Alumi has been replaced by his supposedly, allegedly better brother Hosh, but is he going to replace 30 goal contributions by himself in a squad that hasn't really added much else on top of that? I don't think so. The good thing about Glenwood and their young player base is that young player base has gotten 1 year older, 1 year more experience, and 1 year hungrier to go up after the grand final win. Their older player base has also got 1 year older and 1 year closer to maybe not playing Premier League football anymore. So, gotta strike a balance. I think there's a couple of teams that are more likely to finish in those first 2 spots, but I'll get to them soon. Very soon, in fact, because Oakville are my premiership and promotion favourites. Oakville, of course, reserve grade grand final winners off the back of that great momentum boost that will give them. Go into this season, yes, without the Melenja boys and particularly Shukuru and John, but they've brought in 3 or 4 players with NPL experience at senior level. Yes, not necessarily NPL 1, but in 2 and 3, that in tandem is a bigger boost than losing the 𝐿𝐮𝐵 boys is a detriment. I also think that when Nathan Escalinen decides that he doesn't want to coach anymore in the technical area, then he wants to put his boots back on, that team will become even stronger, and they've kept the majority of their team together. So they're going to get better. And for me, they are probably the best team in the PL2. The only thing for Oakville is that they'll be praying that they can keep everybody fit this year. But speaking about everybody keeping fit, let's talk about Town Rangers FC. Town Rangers FC are my other premiership candidate. But they'll be hoping a Mert Orhan situation in terms of injury doesn't happen again. Losing one of your best players midway through the season for the rest of the season sucks. Now, I've just talked about how losing 𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐵 Malenge isn't that big of a loss, but adding him to your squad is certainly a big boost. There's a difference there, let me explain. He joins a squad where other attackers and midfielders around him suit his play style and the way that they want to attack. Fluid, a little bit maverick, and a lot of fun. Lots of shots, lots of shot-creating actions, doing things that most other teams would be too scared to do because they'd be subbed off by their coach. You're adding 𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐵 Malenge, who scored 30 goals across the last 2.5 years, to a squad that has the reigning player of the year. It's a very good front line, in my opinion. They're not as good as Oakville, in my opinion. Oakville has a bit more bark and a bit more bite and something more to prove. But I think Town Rangers could finish top 2. Now, speaking about two teams that we know very well inside and out, let's talk about a team that I have no idea what to expect. Premier Spurs, they could have Mark Warren, Simone Biles, and Jean-Philippe Mateta in their team, and their coach could be Junior Paulo, and I wouldn't know because they've completely kept their cards to their chest. I have no idea who's in this team and who's leading it. Off the back of recent years, though, outside of having a squad that we knew was good, for example, those Greek boys at Prospect and those Mountaineers from Creek, and knowing what Premier Spurs have done in the competition in years gone by, I can't say that they're going to be anything higher than in jeopardy. I have to put them in the jeopardy category. I'm very sorry, but history tends to repeat itself. Parkley, tough one. Same players, new coach. Will a fresh start yield fresh, better results? I think mid-table. I think this is one of those mid-table teams that we'll label that can actually fight for top 4, and I think this is where there's sort of a bit of a grey area between top 4, between that sort of those middle two categories, top 4 and mid-table, because I think they're definitely a chance of top 4. They might even sit there for half the season like they did last year, but I think they'll finish in mid-table. I'm not confident that player for player their squad is better than the teams that I'm predicting to finish above them. That includes grand finalists, that includes Town Rangers, and that includes Oakville. And all those three teams finished above them last year, except for one that I haven't quite mentioned yet. Is top 4 a possibility for them? Absolutely. Is Ryan Hoffsmith the key to unlocking those things, like top 4? Absolutely. Get him firing, priority number 1 and 2. But a new coach, I think, might just bring some new things. Newbury Bulls are the team that round out my top 4 predictions. I think they're going to finish inside the finals. Yes, I do think that Glenwood and Newbury are going to be the teams that are fighting it out for that top 4. Newbury, to my knowledge, have recruited really well, and I'm really impressed with the things I've been hearing out of that club. They have a young team that I've mentioned so many times I could just wax lyrical about this all day, but they have a young team that's going to improve year on year, even game by game, month by month. Certainly, though, year on year, and we're seeing their first 1 year to 2 year transition, and I think we're going to see a lot of good things. Apparently, they've been very, very good to watch in pre-season. Now, Ash Alumi joining is a wonderful thing.
Hello again, yes, the Victorian intervention is here again. I need to say some things about Newbury that I obviously didn't know until I was here. The first thing is that they have not signed Ash Alumi. Ash Alumi has now, supposedly, inked in a deal with Town Rangers FC. That now pushes Town Rangers FC as, for me, even more of a favourite for the top 2, if not first place. And it also means that I now drop Newbury to a mid-table team, not exactly just because of Ash, but because of some of the things I've learnt in the last couple of days since I recorded the podcast. So for the sake of the fact that I know that information and can't just keep recording this podcast in good faith without now telling you guys, is that I think Newbury will now push down to be a mid-table team like they were last year, and it will now push Glenwood likely back into that spot.
However, I am just going to state this to protect myself. Don't be surprised if Parkley take their spot. Once again, with Minchinbury, I have absolutely no idea who's in this team because I haven't heard, which is a bit of a shame. Apparently, former Ponds top goal scorer, Blake Curry, is there, back in PL2. That is a crazy signing. A lot of similarities with Gareth Bale in terms of personality and kind of the hair as well. The problem I have with Minchinbury is that I just have no idea who else is in the team. So if this is really a one-man team like it kind of was when Blake Curry was a prospect player, and he scored about 50 goal contributions. I'm not even kidding, 50 goal contributions, including having 2 in a grand final. for a reserve grade prospect team, then sure, he could lead it. But this is not reserve grade, this is first grade PL2. You might actually find this weird considering that they have one of the best players in the league on their team, but I actually think they're going to be in the threatened/jeopardy category down there, right next to Spurs. A team who are joining back, have a whole new team coming together, a whole new coach that we know very little about, and I'm going to imagine there's a lot of young players in this, or sort of like early 20s players. History just tells us that there's not going to be a great combination, for the first year at least. Prospect have retained a lot of good players, and yes, they got relegated with a very small number of points last year, but there were some good players in that squad who just weren't reaching their best last year, and whether they're footballers or they're not, they're human, and if they switched off midway through last year, I can understand that. If they're switched on again this year, I wouldn't be surprised. A brand new coach who, unlike 𝐿𝐿, and with all due respect, we all love Lee, me included, he was earning his coaching stripes in a relegation dogfight, whereas the guy that they brought in has been there, done that, survived things like this, and he gets to start in the lower competition where there is no jeopardy. There's only just the chance to go up. It's a huge plus for their incoming coach. We're going to talk about St Pat's now, and unfortunately St Pat's are going to be finishing in mid-table. St Pat's have brought in some good players. St Pat's have lost some good players. Like for like quality, let's say if it was a FIFA card and they were rated 80, they got rid of some 80 rated players, they brought in some 80 rated players. Has the quality of the squad really changed? The same way I was mentioning with 𝐏𝐾𝐂 Junior's women's team with their floor being raised. Has the St Pat's floor been raised? I don't think so. We know what to expect from St Pat's. Tough games physically and occasionally brilliant stuff. I think Sylvester Roberts joining back with the squad is great, even though I'm sure we probably trained last year at times. But I just can't see them breaking into the top four. There are too many good teams around them, and I don't think the players that they brought in, at least to my knowledge, are going to be able to compete with that. Happy to be proven wrong. So there we go. Oakville, I think, are going to finish first, but they're going to be challenged most definitely by Town Rangers with their brilliant squad. Maybe the Millennial boys will have the last laugh against the old Purple Raven compatriots. Prospect, who I think are going to have a decent return back to the PL2 as they recover from their relegation, and they're also going to be joined right next to Newbury, which is probably my boldest prediction so far. Then, of course, we're going to have St Pat's sitting there in mid-table, but below them is going to be Minchinbury, and as well as that is going to be Premier Spurs. Here we go, Premier League 1. This is where we're going to take up the most time. Polonia, jeopardy. This is a good team. There's good culture, there's good individual players, but I'm sorry, that's the bare minimum that a PL1 team needs to have to qualify to be in PL1, in my opinion. Every single PL1 team has good personalities, good characters, and good individual players. Can you tie it together on a Saturday afternoon? That's the question. Polonia might be threatened. There's a real chance of relegation for them, and here is why I think that's the case. And bear with me here, because I'm going to hit you with some facts. The last 3 teams to get promoted, namely Eastern Creek, Prospect, and Tigers. In those 3 respective promotion campaigns, the amount of games that were lost by those 3 teams was 5. Can you guess how many games Polonia lost last year? In what was, you could argue, a worse comp than those previous 2 years? The answer is also 5. They still got promoted, but they lost 5 times. There was a string of 5 games where they lost 4. And I know that the players had weddings and Bucks nights, and there was a whole host of injuries. But unfortunately, that's not necessarily something I can just look past. And the reason I say that I can't just look past this is because of the following reasons. Yes, you can go through an injury-riddled season, like for example, when Liverpool lost Van Dijk and they had about 18 different centre-back partnerships by like mid-February, I think it was. I think that's basically what happened with Polonia last year. But what's to say that those injuries won't come back again with a group of players who are in their more mature footballing years? It could very well happen again, and you're playing against, better players in a more physical league. Now, I know Polonia have gone and got some players, but unfortunately I can't share with you exactly who, because I don't know. I haven't been able to access that information just yet. But if there were some head-turning signings, we would have all heard about them by now. The reality is, I don't think this Polonia team, in terms of the promoted teams that I've seen so far in my tenure here, and I've been here for bordering on 5 years, but this, 4 years I've watched, do I think they can survive and be really competitive with a group of PL1 players who have won grand finals in their younger years and done things at other competitions and been really good and have some of the best mateship I've ever seen? Yeah, absolutely. They could be a mid-table team very, very, very easily. They could also be relegation favourites. Now, if you're watching this episode, that means you watched last week's episode as well. You know full well that Quakers Hill Tigers have lost 75 goal contributions from the last 3 seasons in this off-season. I really, really like the signings that Tigers have made. Scotty Jackson, Jackson Fanning. There's nearly 10 grand finals in Blacktown Premier League, won between those 2. There's a Cottam Cup thrown in there. There's a Champion of Champions thrown in there too. Lots of experience at the front and back ends of the pitch. I really like, if you're a fan and happen to buy into the anecdotal, Charles Portelli. He's a great player who's played in Blacktown and in Hills, and he's come here to Tigers to challenge himself. I'm a fan of 𝐿𝑉𝑠 as well, formerly of St Pat's, but yes, admittedly, a moments player, a guy who can do things that make you go wow on a consistent basis. Probably not so much, and he'd probably admit that too, but a guy who can provide you 8 goals in PL2, they're going to be hoping that can transition into PL1. Something the Quakers Tigers really missed last year in a campaign where they finished second last, but only ahead of a team that finished with 1 win all season, is that Brandon Kemp was missing. He was injured for a whole lot of the season. My prediction is that Scotty Jackson and Kemp will form a very good centre-back partnership. Now, I've been one of the first and most outspoken people when it comes to admitting that Quakers Hill Tigers, when it comes to the Premier League system, are my favourite, probably my favourite club. Yeah, I'll be really honest with you guys, probably my favourite club in their organic growth and development of their junior players into senior players. I've always been a fan of that, and I'm happy to cop flack for being someone who works for the association and promotes such a good thing. But I think it's my responsibility to promote the good things that clubs are doing, and that is a good thing. Those 21 players, though, I have to caveat by saying a couple of things. 21's competition exists because it gives young players the opportunity to be blooded into first-team football, like drip-fed, if you like. And that started happening last season, but they became reliant upon them on points, and then eventually when sort of the adrenaline of being a first-team senior footballer wears off, mistakes can creep into one's game, especially if you're young. There's nothing wrong with being young and making mistakes, but I want to just give an example. The best Premier League 21 graduate I've seen in my time here is Michael Cody of Marion, and he produced 8 goals and got 5 assists to his name in the league alone last year. He's the future of that club, but 8 goals and 4 assists for a team like Marion isn't necessarily world-beating just yet. And Michael Cody is the exemplar. He is the outlier. Not all 21s are going to be built the same way as he is. Now, we know what 21s Tigers are capable of. They've been in grand finals. They could have, maybe should have, won 1 or 2 of them. There's some very, very good players in there, guys that have already made their first grade debuts. But are you able to jump into a first division senior competition where the level of PL1 is the highest it's been in the near 50-year history of the Blacktown District Soccer Football Association? My prediction is no. And that's okay, because I think it's a great thing to invest in the future. Should this team get relegated, for example, what they'll be able to do in PL2 with a young player base could be an undefeated season like they almost had when they just lost that one team in Glenwood 2 years ago. That's the level I'm talking, but that's the future I'm talking about now. And are these players necessarily ready with the lack of sort of outward signings? You've got some of the most fantastic youth in the entire competition of any Blacktown Premier League club. Can you combine that together? Polonia have that experience. Good luck to you. We're now going in ascending order from here, and I want to just talk about Riverstone as well. New coach. I heard they have a very similar team to last year with a couple of new signings here and there. I don't know much about their squad, but if their team is similar to last year and their coaching changes isn't too drastic, they'll probably do something similar, which was 7th last year, and they'll be fine. Somewhere between mid-table and threatened, I'm going to go with mid-table. I think there could be a 5 to 8 point gap on the team below them, but I think there could be a 10 plus point gap to the team above them, and the team above them is Quakers Hill Juniors. Quakers Hill Juniors, mid-table, yes, but one of those sort of mid-table teams that I think, of course, will fight for the top 4, but I don't think they're going to make it. I also think there could be a team that finishes above them, and I'll mention them in just a second. The band is back together, and the squad is objectively better than it was last year. You've got a squad that finished the second half of the season as one of the best formed teams in the competition, and you've added back the likes of Luca Garlo, Gatsby Gray. You've added in as well Sol Surgeon, Matt Pombart. I mean, come on. How did you get him back? How long will it take for those guys to gel? They've been sort of playing in different areas of the competitions, like Will Salinas, for example, has been at Parramatta Melita, and some other guys moved into all age. Can they come back and play exactly the way they were when they were a finals finishing team? It's yet to be seen, but my prediction is no, because other teams have gotten better while they had that year off. Having single commitment Julian is a reason why you'll win some games this year, because his decision-making ability to spot gaps in other teams, and his own, is second to maybe one. However, I think the case is, unless they've got some players that I haven't seen play just yet, defensively they're not as stacked as they once were, and probably should be if they want to finish in the finals. And the team that I'm about to mention has a similar attacking and midfield combination and quality level, but their defence is better. So let's talk about Eastern Creek. Eastern Creek, top 4 hopefuls, just like Quakers Juniors, but they're going to miss out, so I'm going to put them straight away in mid-table. Stark predictions happening here. Now let me explain why. Their biggest loss in the off-season is not a player. It's their coach, Danny Hinton. We welcome back, though, Matt Hattrick and this time Scott Young, not donning the laces, but in fact donning the whiteboard. What kind of difference will that make? Well, let me predict it. They're great blokes. Objectively, some of the funniest guys. Love them. Can't wait to have them back in the competition. Are they as tactically astute as Danny Hinton? No. Is anyone? Arguably no. In saying that, Jovan Blagojevic, Nikola Stanojevic, Pius Baraji, Spud Polinsky, the list goes on. These are good players. I think they'll perform just as good as they did before, but we only have a top 4 final series this year, not top 5. I think this new unit might be a bit more defensive focused than they were as a unit under Danny Hinton, which is why I think the likes of Spud Polinsky and their new goalkeeper is going to be critical. I think they're going to play a lot more direct this year as well. But do I think they'll finish in the finals? No. And I'm about to give you my top 4 in order. The reason why they won't make the top 4 is because the top 4 is stacked. And in 4th place, it's going to be Ponds. I think Ponds are probably the most difficult team for me to predict in the entire association. Women's, men's, 1st division, 2nd division. And let me explain why. They have players that could play at any level of competition that they want to. And the fact that we have some of these players and their pedigree on paper in our competition is a blessing. There's an issue I think that they've maintained from last year to this year though, and that is the lack of defensive reinforcements. Ponds have been known for their premiership pushes in years gone by based upon the inability to score past their brilliant back four. Brendan Salama, Matt Hubbard a couple of years ago, Scotty Jackson a couple of years ago as well when they were playing week in, week out next to each other. They've kind of looked at the fact that they didn't win as many grand finals that they wanted, even though they're ignoring the amount of premierships that they had, for example, and they've almost flipped it on their head in hopes of a new style rendering different results. And it hasn't just yet, even though they were into the teething processes of making that transition. You've lost 𝐏𝐕𝐑𝐒 to workers who we're about to talk about. Have you replaced his midfield tenacity and bite? I'm not sure. Now, in saying that, there are some names on your list that I don't recognise and that could fill those gaps perfectly, just the way Jonathan Dallaire did last year, and I hadn't heard of him and he came in to be one of the best players in the comp. Speaking of him though, former Uguna Lions man is gone. Tore his ACL and he's probably going to be back there when a bit closer to home and work, and it's been great to have him, but have you replaced him? Lots of attacking talent, 2 or 3 players per position in each of those attacking areas, but what about defensively? The competition needs Ponds to be up there. The collective vibe around Ponds this year is one where people are looking over their shoulders, looking around corners, trying to figure out what on earth is going on there. Who are these Hills-based players? Who are these players coming from here and there? Is Tong back? Yes, 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 and the answer was yes. They're going to be really interesting to watch. And like I said, the competition needs you to be good, and so do I. You're easy to promote. There's every chance Ponds walks this league with 400 goals scored and set new records this year. But I don't see the defensive setup, and I'm wondering how far and how long it might take before they finally figure themselves out. I'm keen to see it though. In front of Ponds, finishing in 3rd, will be Blacktown Workers. You have a consistent finals finishing team that have not lost any of their good first team border players, and you've brought in players that have championship, premiership credibility and experience, and also, of course, a coach who's won the biggest thing in Blacktown District Soccer Football history when it comes to the Premier League level, in Jason Charles. Imagine having a team so good that already plays such good football under one coach, adding about 6 or 7 players that you could argue for competitions for spots might be able to just jump into there and add to the already great player base that they've got. You're going to move up the table. I think it's unavoidable that you get better. You don't really need tactical tweaking. I think you just need someone who's going to help these new players assimilate into the squad. And yes, I know you lost Tom Guthrie, who was so pivotal last year, but you've got some great names in there too. You've got Rivaldo. Also, Blake Ford is going to feel like a new signing. He doesn't have to play centre-back anymore. Mackenzie Chavinder's come in from Ropes. Speaking of Ropes, Ahmed Badat's come in as well. These are great, great players. So I think your usual tactical rigidity and also your ability to just be so consistent and know exactly what you're going to get from Workers week in, week out means that these players are going to push that little 5% more than those previous players maybe, or just push those previous players to push even harder for a first grade spot. It's going to do wonderful things for you as a whole. 3rd place. In 2nd place. My prediction for 2nd place is the reigning champions, Doonside Hawks. And before you hit the like button for being ballsy, let me tell you why. As you know again from our podcast last week, they're adding some pretty good quality into their front line this year. Doonside Hawks are either going to have a better season than last year because of the fact that they've barely changed their first grade team, barring Byron Grandemage, or they're going to accidentally, unintentionally rest on their laurels and go slightly backwards as a team and not be able to answer the question as to why that is. But I just want to put something to you that I find really strange about Doonside. I want you to name me their best 11 and include Byron in that now. Okay, so you've taken a player out of the midfield, you're putting them now in a 4-3-3. You've got Jaden here, you've got Dominici boys here, and you've got that potent front line. Now, last year when Ponds had this potent front line with two Blakes and these creative midfielders behind them, and also, of course, 𝐏𝐑𝐄𝐃𝐈𝐒𝐓 through the middle, did they win a grand final? No. Did they come close to the Premier's plate? No. Now, that's not to say that 𝐷𝐿SIDE are going to do the same thing. They're a different team with a different tactical approach. But I think that 𝐷𝐿SIDE's issue might actually be that their first team is too predictable, and I'm not sure there's enough competition for places in that squad. Again, I'll be able to justify this a bit more when I go into talking about our first place team. But allow me to sort of expand on it a little bit without mentioning Mariong too many times. If I ask you to name Workers, Ponds, and Mariong's best 11, just think about it for a second. Are you noticing that it's difficult? Are you noticing that you can't quite pick between which left wing to go with, which midfield three to go with? You know, obviously there's some key players that are going to fit in no matter what. But you can't name the best 11. And with 𝐷𝐿SIDE you can, and I wonder if there's a bit of potential for that to become a bit stale as the season goes on. Now, Byron 𝐿𝐿rrange is the ultimate kick to this. He's the guy who comes in and provides, let's say, 20 goal contributions, depending on when he starts to play, because he might not get assimilated into the first team for the first couple of rounds or so. Of course, serving a suspension at the moment too. 𝐷𝐿SIDE could very well go win this campaign and do it undefeated. However, I just don't think that's the case. We saw that 𝐷𝐿SIDE can beat anybody in particular night when they humbled Mariong 4-1 in the semi-finals last year, and then went on to win the grand final as well against Ponds. Does that mean that I think they can do it over the course of the season? I think there's a reason why they haven't won a premiership, even though they've been champions twice, and I think that reason will continue on. I think there's a chance that their first 11 is too established, that their way of playing is too established, and that actually might hold them back from unlocking a new style of play and unlocking potentially an even higher ceiling as a squad. It's a prediction, and I'm about to explain why I've picked Mariong as first. First and foremost, the most important thing to talk about is that Dylan Owusu's return is like a new signing. For me, he's a top 5 player in the competition, and pound for pound, arguably the best player in the competition. In terms of right backs compared to other right backs, he's so far ahead of everyone else, it's almost unfair. He's also been playing as a centre-back recently as he returns to full health, so if he can pick up centre-back, the ability to play centre-back, while also playing as a left and or right back, dangerous. Basically like a new signing. Speaking of new signings, let's talk about that a little bit more. Perhaps it's the fact that they've lost potentially their best signing ever in 𝐿𝐿rrange, their captain and talisman for a long, long time. Of course, signed from Rudy Hill about 6 or 7 years ago. Losing him in the dressing room is going to be a very different thing. Kelvin's been announced as the new captain, but a different type of leader, a quiet leader, less of an arm around the shoulder kind of guy. And while Merv might still be around sporadically, he's not part of the squad anymore. That's a big loss for them, I will admit. However, they've recruited not just young talent, not quite young talent. They've recruited talent that are sort of in their early 20s with NPL experience here, or they've already been at the club before in years gone by, or they've worked with 𝐏𝐻 or 𝐿𝐻 in the African Cup, or again, in years gone by at different clubs, or Mariong. And they've brought them together, and they're all around this player age, and all in these similar positions, where I think they have so much competition for spots that their second team, their reserve grade team, as we saw, for example, in the Australia Cup against Central Coast, is going to be just as hard to beat at times as their first team. They picked up a goalkeeper who can save like a cat. He could potentially be the best goalkeeper in the league if he sticks around for the entire season. He's that good. He shouldn't be playing at this level. That's a huge pickup for them. And I'm talking about the replacement of Dean Kenny Rogers. Mariong have got the smartest heads in the competition by far in terms of emotional maturity, footballing maturity, and footballing smarts. And they've added some lightning pace in key areas. If there's anything that Mariong have lacked in the last 2 years, and that includes the championship year and last year's premiership year, it's pace, raw pace and power. And they've added a lot of that this year. I think you could also sort of add that there's a lot of annoyance in how their season bowed out last year. You know, had the bye that they didn't like. They then got into the semi-finals with a week off, and they versed an invigorated 𝐷𝐿SIDE team that were hungry to prove more hungry than them. And now it's their turn to be hungry. There's a bit more bite and anger to the usual reserved Mariong play style that I saw the other night. And it made me feel really excited to watch them again. I should also mention that I've talked about having great depth and what that will mean for Mariong this year with some of the attacking players that they've brought in. But I also should mention that I did say the same thing about Workers and Ponds with all their attacking talents. The difference is the defence. And again, Dylan Owusu returning, also Mamouche Aguer returning as well, finally after 2 years out. They've got a really, 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 really solid defence. Is because even though they don't have as many attacking and midfield rotational options that are as good as those of the teams around them, their defence and their fitness base is so solid that it makes up for those mistakes and those sort of setbacks. And for Mariong, they've got what looks to be an extremely, extremely good attack. Their midfield has the reigning 2-time player of the year in it, as well as some new talent around. And of course, they have the best defence in the league and have done for the last 2 years. Mariong, my premiership favourites, 𝐷𝐿SIDE second, Workers third, Fourth will be Ponds. Missing out just will be Eastern Creek. A little tiny bit below them will be Quakers Juniors. That's been enough for this episode. My name is Mark Topoli. Thank you so much for tuning in. Of course, if you've liked what you've seen in this episode, please press the like button. Let me know if you've enjoyed. Subscribe. I want to hear all of your reactions to this. Tell me what I've got wrong. Tell me what you think I've got right. Tell me how much of an idiot I am. I'm here for it. I'm happy to put my neck on the line. That's why I made this video. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for getting to this point of the video. And cue the outro music. But it's fallen here towards Icon!
Oh my word.
And now played and struck and in! Further forward now, Tanya! Ryan Dominici! Wants a second goal. Isabel Brett should have a second goal!